The harsh truth: love doesn't always mean support in old age. The ceiling fan spun lazily, its squeak echoing in the silence of the old wooden house. A faint smell of dust and medicine lingered in the air, mixing with the sharp scent of boiled rice cooling on the table. Mr. Arun sat in his armchair, his back stiff, his eyes fixed on the narrow doorway. The clock ticked with an uneven rhythm, louder than it had ever been before. He waited for the sound of footsteps, for the familiar voice of his son, for the laughter of his grandchildren. But only silence answered. His wrinkled hands trembled slightly as he reached for the glass of water on the side table. The glass felt heavier than usual, slippery against his fingers. For a moment, he thought he heard the gate outside creak open. Hope rushed through him, a sudden warmth rising in his chest. He straightened, his lips parting to call out a name. But the sound faded into the distance, only the wind brushing against the tin roof. He lowered himself back into the chair, his breath shallow, his chest heavy. On the wall hung a photograph, a smiling family framed in sunlight, taken many years ago. He stared at the picture until his eyes burned, trying to recognize the faces that had once been so close. A noise startled him. The shrill ring of the telephone cut through the stillness. He forced himself up, each step dragging across the rough wooden floor. The receiver felt cold against his ear, pressing into his thin skin. His daughter's voice came through, hurried, distracted. She spoke of work, of time, of things that seemed far away from the small house he lived in. Arun asked softly if she could visit. There was a pause, long and heavy. Then she said it was not possible this month. The line crackled and went dead. He stood there, the silence pressing in, thicker than before. The house seemed larger now, the corners darker, the emptiness louder. He felt his knees weaken, his hands sliding along the table to steady himself. The untouched rice on the table had grown cold, a thin film forming over it. His stomach growled, but he could not move to eat. From outside, a dog barked, sharp and restless, breaking the night air. Arun's chest tightened, his breath catching as if the walls themselves were closing in. He turned toward the window, his eyes catching a flicker of movement beyond the glass. A shadow passed, slow and deliberate, pausing at the edge of the yard. Arun froze, his throat dry, his fingers gripping the frame of the window. The shadow lingered, then seemed to lean closer, its shape stretching against the dim moonlight. The shadow lingered in the yard, motionless, as though it were studying the house. Arun's heart thudded, each beat echoing in his ears. He pressed his forehead against the cool glass, straining his eyes to see more clearly. The moonlight flickered through the branches of the old neem tree, casting broken shapes across the ground. For a moment, the shadow blended with them, melting into the darkness. But then, it moved again. A deliberate step. Slow. Measured. The crunch of gravel drifted faintly through the night air. Arun's breath caught, and his hand fumbled for the curtain, pulling it closed with trembling fingers. The fabric did little to stop the sense of being watched. He stepped back, his legs weak beneath him, the wooden floor groaning with each movement. The silence inside the house seemed unbearable now, filled with the weight of an unseen presence. Arun's eyes darted to the telephone. He thought of calling his son, but a wave of hesitation stopped him. Would he answer at this hour? Would he even believe? The memory of his daughter's hurried voice returned, the casual dismissal that had cut into his heart. He felt suddenly foolish, yet the fear pressing against his chest was real. Very real. The dog outside barked again, louder, its cry sharp and frantic. It was not the bark of a playful animal. It was a warning. Arun's breath grew shallow as he edged toward the kitchen. The air smelled faintly of onions and the cold rice still waiting on the table. He opened the drawer with shaky hands, pulling out the old flashlight he kept for power cuts. The switch clicked, but the beam was weak, flickering as if resisting life. Still, it was better than nothing. He gripped it tightly, moving back toward the living room, each step echoing in the hollow silence. The curtain stirred slightly as the wind slipped through the edges of the window frame. Arun's throat tightened, his ears straining for the faintest sound. Then it came. A knock. Soft. Barely audible. But real. His chest clenched, his heart pounding against his ribs as though trying to escape. Another knock followed, this time firmer, echoing through the empty house. The sound vibrated through his bones, chilling him. Arun froze. No one visited him at this hour. No one visited him at all anymore. His mouth went dry, his lips parting without a sound. He turned slowly toward the door, the weak beam of the flashlight shaking with his trembling hand. The wood of the door looked older than ever, its paint peeling, its frame crooked under years of neglect. He took a step closer, the floor creaking like a warning. Another knock. This time, longer. Almost impatient. Arun swallowed hard, his voice barely a whisper as he asked, "Who is there?" Silence answered. The only sound was the faint rustle of the neem tree outside, its branches brushing against the roof. The dog barked again, then suddenly yelped, a sharp cry that ended too quickly. Arun's knees trembled, his grip on the flashlight slick with sweat. He wanted to move, to step back, but his feet felt anchored to the ground. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then the handle of the door rattled. Slow. Deliberate. Arun staggered back, his breath ragged, his chest heaving as he held the flashlight like a weapon. The door creaked under the pressure, though the lock held firm. The sound sent shivers crawling across his skin. Suddenly, the rattling stopped. Silence fell again, deeper than before, as if the entire night held its breath. Arun waited, his ears straining, his pulse hammering in his temples. Minutes passed, or maybe only seconds, it was impossible to know. Then came a whisper. Faint. From the other side of the door. A voice calling his name. Arun. The sound was fragile, almost broken, but unmistakable. His eyes widened, his breath caught in his throat. It was a voice he knew. A voice he had not heard in years. His wife's. Arun's hand shook violently, the flashlight beam darting across the walls as his mind raced. It could not be. She had been gone for more than a decade, her ashes scattered by the river. Yet the voice came again, clearer this time. Arun, open the door. His stomach twisted, his legs threatening to give way beneath him. He clutched his chest, struggling to breathe, his ears filling with the sound of his pounding heart. He forced himself to speak, his voice cracking. Who are you? The silence that followed was unbearable. Then, soft laughter drifted through the wood. It was not warm. It was not kind. It was hollow, sharp, and cold enough to freeze his veins. Arun stumbled backward, the chair behind him scraping against the floor as he fell into it. The photograph on the wall shook slightly, tilting under the tremor. He pressed a trembling hand to his mouth, his eyes wide, his body locked in terror. The laughter faded slowly, dissolving into the stillness of the night. Outside, the wind rose, howling through the trees, shaking the loose tin sheets on the roof. Arun sat frozen, his fingers clenched tight around the useless flashlight, his eyes fixed on the trembling door. The room felt colder now, the air pressing against him like ice. The ticking of the clock filled the silence once more, each tick like the beat of a drum of dread. Arun wanted to scream, to call someone, anyone, but the words would not leave his throat. The house seemed to close in around him, every corner thick with shadows that stretched and shifted. Somewhere outside, the shadow moved again. This time, heavier. Closer. Arun's breath rattled in his chest as the doorknob turned slowly once more. The doorknob twisted, slow and deliberate, metal scraping against metal. Arun's eyes locked on it, his body frozen, his hands slick with sweat. The lock groaned, resisting, but each turn sent a shiver through his chest. He clutched the armrest of the chair, his fingernails digging into the worn wood. The silence between each creak of the handle felt endless. Then, suddenly, it stopped. The stillness pressed down, thicker than before, suffocating the air in the room. Arun strained to hear, his ears searching for the faintest sound. Nothing. No wind. No dog. No voice. Just the heavy thud of his own heartbeat. He forced himself to rise, his legs trembling beneath him, the chair scraping against the floor. The flashlight beam flickered wildly as he lifted it, pointing toward the door. The yellow glow trembled across the peeling paint and rusted hinges. Then came the sound. A scratch. Low. Slow. Dragging across the wood, like fingernails tracing a name. Arun's breath broke, his chest heaving, the sound cutting deep into his bones. The scratching grew louder, more frantic, like something desperate to break through. He staggered backward, his heel catching the edge of the rug, nearly sending him sprawling. The photograph on the wall tilted further, swinging on its nail until it fell face down to the floor. The glass cracked, the sound sharp and final in the silence. Arun's eyes darted to it, then back to the door, his body shaking uncontrollably. And then, suddenly, the scratching stopped. The silence roared back, heavy and absolute. Arun stood frozen, the flashlight trembling in his grip, the weak beam cutting into the stillness. Seconds dragged into minutes, each one heavier than the last. Then, from the window, came another sound. A whisper. Not from the door. Not from outside. From inside the room. Arun! His blood ran cold, his knees buckling beneath him. The flashlight slipped from his grasp, clattering against the floor, its beam rolling across the walls. The voice was closer now, soft and steady, as if spoken directly into his ear. Open the door. Arun gasped, spinning toward the sound, his eyes wide with terror. But the room was empty. The curtains fluttered though the window was closed. The air turned colder, heavy enough to choke. Arun staggered backward until his spine pressed against the wall, his body pinned by fear. The doorknob rattled again. Harder this time. The lock groaned as if it would finally give way. The doorknob shook violently, the door straining against its frame as if something pressed from the other side. Arun's breath came in shallow bursts, his chest tight, his body trembling against the wall. Then, just as suddenly, the noise ceased. The silence returned, heavy and suffocating, filling every corner of the room. He waited, frozen, his ears straining for another sound. But nothing came. Only the slow tick of the clock. The shadows in the corners seemed to retreat, softening as the night grew quiet once more. Arun's knees gave way, and he sank slowly into the chair, his hands clutching its arms like anchors. The broken photograph lay on the floor beside him, its glass fractured, but the smiles inside still visible. He gazed at it, his heart aching with a hollow weight. The voices, the knocking, the laughter, real or not, they left him shaken with a truth he could not deny. The house was empty. Too empty. And in that emptiness, the echoes of his loneliness grew louder than any ghost. He closed his eyes, his breath trembling, as the clock ticked on into the night. Far away, the faint glow of dawn began to push against the horizon. But inside the small wooden house, time felt still, caught between memory and silence. Arun opened his eyes once more, his gaze lingering on the photograph. His lips moved, whispering words no one could hear. Words meant for the faces in the frame, for voices that had drifted too far away. The house remained quiet, holding its secrets, its shadows, and its silence. And Arun understood at last, family could not always be counted on after 60. Sometimes, only memories stayed. Sometimes, only shadows came back. And sometimes, silence was the only companion left.